Hello, wherever you are in the world today, thank you for joining us for The Rise Traveler, unpacking conversations of sustainable travel. We're here to move a step beyond the Instagram-ready world of travel and think critically and deeply about how travel can uplift global communities, protect natural ecosystems, and be a source of growth for travelers. Here at Rise Travel Institute, we are committed to empowering travelers and travel professionals through education. Our programs, research, experiential journeys, scholarships, and free resources are all aimed at bringing you closer to a more responsible and ethical travel experience. Learn more by visiting risetravelinstitute.org.
I'm Vincie Ho, the guest host for Season 4. In this special season, we'll be talking to critical theory scholars, activists, leaders in sustainability and social and environmental justices in the travel and tourism space. And together, we'll delve into the ethics of travel and discuss some of the pressing issues that are impacting communities at travel destinations around the world. Today, I'm so excited to have Mawutor Agbo to be our guest. Mawutor Agbo, who goes by Moto, is a PhD candidate in the Department of Recreation and Leisure Studies at the University of Waterloo. He holds a Master of Environmental Studies in Geography from the Department of Geography and Environmental Management, University of Waterloo, and a Bachelor of Science with Honors in Tourism Management from the University of Cape Coast, Ghana. In partial fulfillment of his MSc degree, Mawutor explored the potential of community-based ecotourism as an ecologically based approach to forest governance in Ghana. Much of his work has focused on ecotourism development, community advocacy, forest conservation, and sustainability in community tourism contexts. Mawutor's research interests fall within the intersections of tourism education, decolonization in tourism context, community-based tourism, human-nature relationships, tourism ethics and justice, and critical theory. As a critical tourism researcher, Mawutor's present research work focuses on tourism education and colonization relationships, interrogating how academic institutions operate either as sites of colonial reinforcement and or resistance. He has also contributed to projects fostering tourism justice, ethics, and sustainability in community-based tourism context in Ghana. So Mawutor, welcome again. We are so happy to have you share your expertise and your experiences with us today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Vincie, and thank you to all the team members at the Rise Travel Institute. And thanks to all your cherished listeners. I'm excited to be here today as well.
Very excited to be talking to you today. So to start this conversation, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up in Ghana, and how you ended up in Canada for your PhD studies?
Yeah, absolutely. As you rightly mentioned, I was born in Ghana many years ago. I grew up, had my elementary and my high school and my college and bachelor's education all in Ghana. I grew up mostly along the coast of Ghana. And so my parents were in the Volta region of Ghana at the time I was born. And then after my elementary and junior high education, I moved to the southwestern part of Ghana, Cape Coast, where I did my college education in tourism management, and then also proceeded to the University of Cape Coast, where I had my bachelor's and worked a few years, a little bit, mostly within the industry of tourism and hospitality management. And it was in 2017 that I moved to Canada in pursuit of further education, again, under the broad umbrella of tourism, sustainability, and themes like that. So come from a big family of 7.
Wow.
And so, yes, that's how my childhood has been in Ghana, engaging in activities that we could consider tourism or travel. And then that led me into coming into Canada in 2017.
Awesome. And the university
Yes,
that you went to in Cape Coast is definitely one of the top universities in your country. So
yes.
amazing. So yeah, I would like to talk a little bit about tourism in Ghana. As you said, like, when you were small, when you were younger, like growing up in Ghana, what was the tourism like? What was tourism or tourism industry or tourism development look like to you in Ghana, and how does that compare with how it is today? So
Mm.
I see a lot of volunteerism projects. Well, I mean, I'm pretty surprised that I still see a lot of them. Well, I thought with the increased awareness of the harm of many of such projects, this particular industry was on the decline, but I apparently still exists. And then there is heritage tourism and also ecotourism that are getting very trendy in Ghana, and also probably because Ghana is a relatively safe and politically stable country in sub-Saharan Africa, so it's like really gaining a lot of attention in recent years. So, and your country has also a 15-year tourism plan seeking to bring 8 times more annual visitors to the country by 2027. In your opinion, what are some benefits and negative impacts tourism has brought to your country and will continue to bring to your country, like both positive and negative impacts? And what are some social and environmental issues that your country is currently facing? And is tourism alleviating or aggravating those issues?
Ooh, this is it's an all encompassing
Yeah.
question, and I love it. Great question, and
Yeah.
I would start off by how tourism looked like when I was
Mhm.
growing up. So tourism has just by natural default been part of human activity, and
Yeah.
Ghanaians are no exception. In the Ghanaian context, especially growing up, travel was mostly a thing of visiting friends and relatives and families, and not necessarily about traveling to places for pleasure and recreation as we see today. And so
Right.
there is a sharp contrast between
Mhm.
what travel or tourism looked like in Ghana a few years ago, not few, many years ago when I was growing up, versus what it is now, right?
Right.
I remember those times I would always with my siblings. I have 4 siblings, by the way. Together with
Mhm.
my siblings and my parents, we would take periodic travels. And these travels
Mhm.
were not necessarily to specific attraction sites. They were mostly travel to go see our grandparents, relatives, like weddings. This was what tourism looked like today, has actually also been in existence for a very long time in Ghana. Prior
Mhm.
to independence in 1957, many past governments had invested a lot into tourism. There were deliberate actions by governments to establish a whole ministry that would see to the planning and development of tourism in Ghana. And so all the way before, like I said, before independence in 1950, it was from around the 1970s that actual plans started becoming very real as government's commitment to developing tourism. And so in the 1970s, several committees were set up, and their job was mostly to take an inventory of the tourism resources that Ghana had,
Mhm.
to advise the government on what could be done to develop these potentials. Then in 1972, institutions began to be set up. We had the Ghana Tourism Development Company. Then in 73, the Ghana Tourism Board. And so you
Mhm.
could see that right from the 1970s, there were actual political actions
Yeah.
to sort of give tourism an establishment, right? And
Mhm.
it
Mhm.
was in 1993 that we had the first official Ministry of Tourism that was set up to oversee the operations of tourism in Ghana, and then
Mhm.
project tourism in Ghana to potential travelers from across the globe. There has been several development plans. They have mostly been 15-year development plans, several of them in the past. And you spoke rightly about the current one that we have now, and government's plans to position Ghana as a very friendly and welcoming destination. Now, the tourism resources of Ghana are broadly categorized into like 4 different parts, 4 different kinds of resources. There is the cultural resources. There is also the historical. Ghana has a very significant recognition when it comes to heritage tourism. Of course, the transatlantic slave trade that happened many years ago from a lot of African countries to the North Americas and also parts of Europe, also in Latin America. And so Ghana played a really huge role. I think mostly because of its location. Ghana is sort of central. We describe ourselves as being in the center of the world because the latitude 0 degrees is just right beneath Ghana, and the longitude 0 also passes through Ghana. So that is very important. People don't like to hear that, but that's what it is, though. That's exactly what it is. So so there's that cultural element, there's the historical element, there's the ecological resources we have, and also the recreational tourism resources. So that's how Ghana actually looks at tourism. It's about the 4th foreign exchange earner for the country now, and so it's a big thing. Right after gold, cocoa, and remittances from Ghanaians abroad, tourism is the next foreign exchange earner for the country. So there's a lot. You can see a lot of government investments, private sector investment into this area. You also you asked about impact tourism has brought to Ghana, whether there has been any sort of benefits, social issues that maybe tourism is contributing to or alleviating. I think that there are several of those. Just like you would find in many parts of the world where tourism is playing a huge part in the economic development. In Ghana, tourism has brought about a number of things, benefits. Obviously, there are. We speak to a lot of economic benefits. Tourism has resulted in job creation for lots of people in the localities that enable tourism. We also see that multiply effect of tourism spendings. Money that is spent in attraction sites. A person who is engaged in tourism employment makes money from revenue and also uses that to take care of children's fees, and it goes into education. And so that multiply effect from different angles. There is also that element of infrastructural development. Of course, it's not completely there yet, but because of tourism, there has been some level of development in many parts of the country that this tourism attraction is actually existing. So several of those, it's also just generally putting Ghana on the map, right? The kind of image that Ghana has. Today, we are here talking about Ghana and tourism because I believe the huge role that it's playing. The past couple of years post-COVID have also been very significant. It's mainly targeting Ghanaians and Africans in the diaspora to come visit. So these are some of the dynamics of, I don't know if I touched on all the questions you asked in that question, but wonderful.
Yeah, you answered beautifully. Thank you so much. Yeah, like you just gave us a lot more context about how tourism looks like in Ghana. So currently, there has been policies and plans to attract a lot of foreign investments into the country. So I'm just wondering, I'm curious about how that may conflict with community-based tourism when you have all these bigger foreign investments like building hotels or tour operators bringing foreigners in to the country. Do you see a balance there, and what does the community-based tourism trend look like currently in Ghana?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for asking that, because it's a challenge. To be fair, it's a challenge. Of course, tourism is trying its best in the Ghanaian context um, to provide and to accrue the maximum benefits to all communities that enable tourism. But there are key um, sort of macro level kinds of analysis that we need to look at. And if you go critically into the tourism businesses and hospitality businesses in Ghana, you would notice that lots of the hospitality services, like the hotels, the car operations, store operations, and all the other elements of hospitality that are run in Ghana are owned by foreign businesses, like you pointed out. And
And
so
hence
a lot
tourism
of the
leakage,
times,
right? Yeah.
exactly. A lot of the times what happens is the leakage. So you have travelers who come. So the goal of the Ghana Tourism Authority and the Ministry of Tourism now is to, by the end of 2024, attract about 1.5 million tourists, international tourists. Currently, the 2022 statistics show that, of course, we had about 1 million tourists pre-COVID, but COVID and its implications on travel across the globe obviously has dipped the numbers in many destinations. But now you can see that trajectory of growth and building back strong. And so the expectation is to generate about $2 billion by the end of 2024, to have about 1 million international tourists visit Ghana by the end of 2024. Unfortunately, most of these travelers, when they come, they end up in the multinational, international businesses, big companies and hotels. And so what happens is that the money goes back to economies that are enabling these kinds of developments. And so it's a huge challenge to community-based tourism. You find just a handful of most of these travelers who come engage in community-based activities. Most people have sort of planned out itineraries about things they want to do. If you think about it, really, the North American and the European market of tourists who go to Ghana, these are people who are mostly on like a fixed itinerary. They have a 2-week maximum vacation. And so they're just interested in making the best of their money, right? Like they want to go, which is legitimate, right? Like they want to do something other than work. And so they are mostly on a very tight itinerary and so are not able to end up in a lot of these community-based projects or localities. And so it's a challenge. There are great programmings for community-based tourism projects in Ghana, but they are not there yet because of these both micro and macro level challenges that Ghana, like many other countries, are facing. So do I have hope? Yeah, hopefully things might change in the future. We'll see how that goes.
It seems like more and more travelers are seeking community-based or community-led tourism activities. So that's I think like with seeing that trend, I'm with you. I'm also hopeful that more travelers are more conscious about alternative choices out there and how they can travel differently to support local communities and make sure that they are actually doing that. Great. And so thank you so much for educating us about Ghana and all that's going on there in relation to tourism. It's
I love to
fascinating.
talk about Ghana, so that's all right.
I have never been, but I just for some reason I've a few close friends who are from Ghana, and so it feels so close to me. And
You should visit Ghana.
should visit. Definitely. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to visiting, and also all the delicious food that I got introduced.
The food is exceptional.
That I got introduced is so amazing. Anyway, so thank you so much. Now, can we talk a little bit about critical tourism studies? Could you explain to our listeners what that means, like critical tourism study for some people who have never maybe come across that term or the area of studies, and why did you pick this particular discipline to specialize in? And what were your motivations?
Wow, these great questions. And I love talking about critical tourism studies. I think that before I just delve into my understanding on what critical tourism is, there's a need for us to first understand that tourism um, has been part, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's been part of human existence for millennia.
Yep.
It's been there from time immemorial. Some people also, the word they use interchangeably with tourism is travel or movement. So tourism
Yeah.
necessarily involves travel, right? And of
Mhm.
course, the advent of the jet aircraft, was what made tourism transcend into global phenomenon, right?
Yeah.
And because of that global touch to it, there is also significant impacts on various environments, and that also attracts multiple kinds of markets, and because of the expansion in travel opportunities, right? And so we see that happen, resulting in processes of globalization, going beyond just notions that pertain to traditionally developed nations, to even including destinations that are not necessarily seen as developed nations.
Yeah.
Now, understanding these complexities requires that when we think about tourism, we do this contextualizing how all these interplays one with another, the factors. There is a need for us to do a critical analysis of how all these related uh, factors come together, right? That's where critical tourism actually comes to play. And so critical tourism is just that phenomenon that looks beyond just travel. It looks beyond the idea that tourism involves movement from a place to another, and that's it. It moves beyond that, and then it gets into that domain of, examining things that we always overlook as outcomes of tourism. So just looking beyond just movement, looking beyond travel, to examining the things that are potential outcomes. So critical tourism studies is very interdisciplinary. It's a field that is multiple disciplines coming together, a field of inquiry that examines tourism from a very critical perspective. Specifically in what I do, it goes beyond just travel and looking at how issues such as power relations, inequities, and sustainability, cultural representation, and colonization and decolonization, how all these things can play a part in the analysis of tourism. So critical tourism scholars look at some of these concerns generally, and so we adopt various kinds of theories, methodologies, and approaches, just different approaches to examining and looking at how tourism operates, and how it could also function more in more just and more equitable, more ethical, and more safe ways. So basically, that's I know that's been it's a very big question, but I hope
No, it's
this
it's you just said that beautifully. You
okay,
basically
great.
explained the mission of Rice Travel Institute.
Wonderful.
That's exactly what we do. But of course, I understand that, like, critical tourism studies at the higher education level is really to apply theories and critical theory and look in decolonial theory to look into the complexity. I love the word that you used just now, the complexity of how tourism as a system, what is happening within that system, and like all the outcomes, like negative and positive outcomes that come out of this operations, or like mobility. So yeah, absolutely. I think this is very helpful for some of our listeners who may not understand. Like, when we talk about studying tourism at in higher education, oftentimes we think about tourism management, hospitality management, and that's the practical
Sure.
side of it. And
Mm.
and critical tourism studies is it's really a critical examination of global tourism, the global tourism industry, or travel and human mobilities, and how that interact with other social issues, as you said,
Exactly.
and like how power plays out in the context of travel. So
Mm.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tell me about a little bit about your PhD research. What are you focusing on right now? And I know that you're close to finishing your PhD.
Wonderful.
So yeah, I cannot wait to hear from you about how your oral defense goes in a couple months. And so yeah, so good luck with that first. And yeah,
Thank you.
tell us a little bit about what it focuses on, and what do you mean by like decolonizing tourism education? If I don't remember wrongly, that's your field of studies, right? And so
Exactly.
what does that actually mean, and what is the problem that you're trying to solve?
Great question. And I don't know if I'll be able to summarize all my PhD work that I've been doing for all these
No.
years in a few
To
sentences,
explain
but
it
I'll try.
yeah,
I
explain it
promise
in a
I'll
way
try.
that everybody understands.
I promise I'll try. But just before I start, I want to give a big shout out to my supervisor who has, been very supportive on this journey. Brian Grimwood is my supervisor, an amazing
Yes.
supervisor and scholar that I've been working with for some time now. You're right. So my PhD work, which is wrapping up, coming to an end, uh, it's examining colonization and tourism education relationships within the educational cultural context of Ghana. Specifically, I'm looking at the University of Cape Coast, which is where I did my undergraduate study. So I'm trying to unpack or describe, or if you like, interrogate the relationships that one are very obvious and those that are also not so obvious between tourism education. And by tourism education, all encompassing anything that has to do with curriculum, pedagogy, supervisor-student relationships, power dynamics and imbalances, justice, even site, the physical site of this institutions. So we're looking at ways in which all these components of tourism education relate or intersect with the notion of colonialism, colonization, or any form that might take. So the goal of this PhD work is to pave way for a form of tourism education that disrupts traditional existing paradigms and basically open the door for narratives and advancements and educational approaches that are just, educational approaches that are liberating, approaches that are maybe inclusive, educational approaches that are also culturally sensitive and resonant with the context that it is being studied. So hopefully we are able to provide that sort of understanding and framework within which researchers, academic institutions, students, faculty members, industry players like Rice Travel Institute, and all your cherished listeners and lovers of travel, to think more practically about how tourism as a phenomenon can intersect colonization. There are many ways that these relationships manifest, but are not very obvious. And so that's what my PhD is hoping to do, to unravel or to unpack these kinds of relationships.
Wow.
I hope I did a good job summarizing my whole PhD in a few sentences.
That's amazing. And actually, I'm super intrigued, and I want to ask a little, maybe a couple more questions about that in particular.
Sure.
So when you said that tourism education in higher education in Ghana, in particular in your PhD study or research, can you give us some examples of how colonial it still is, like in terms of maybe are you talking about professor students? Are the professors like mostly white or like, foreigners? Or the books in your library on tourism studies, are they mostly by Western authors? And like, what exactly are some concrete examples to show like what you're trying to decolonize?
Yeah, great question. And I think that you even started off by touching on some of my responses. So within the terrain of tourism education, I'm looking at, for instance, what kind of books you touched on, what kind of materials, right? Academic materials that are available. Well, a little background. So Ghana was colonized by the British. And so post
That I can relate
independence.
for someone from Hong Kong.
Right. So fast forward post independence, there are still many manifestations of this past kind of relationship that existed between Ghana and several other countries. It wasn't just the British, by the way. Ghana actually changed hands multiple times in the hands of other nations. But the point I want to make here is that even though today we do not have the physical presence of these nations in the country, there are many manifestations of the past. There are still present day manifestations of this relationship. And so we can talk about notions such as the new colonial, we can talk about post-colonialism, new colonialism, we can talk about different forms and manifestations of colonization. So because of that trace of relationship that has been there, a lot of things that are happening now in Ghana still have some sorts of connections. So the way our political system, for instance, is done. Right. We practice the presidential system of governance, which obviously is not a direct representation of what the British system does, which is the monarchical or the prime minister kind of system. But we do have a lot of our operations still fashioned after many nations that are not necessarily of Ghanaian origin, right? So politics, even education, the system of education we have, where we have the high school system, then the senior high and things like that, the number of years you do in high school, then if you bring it to healthcare, and then you go into transportation and many things like that have been, you can see the trace, right? So in education, it's not a different situation. It's a similar kind of phenomenon. So my research work is looking at specific things like pedagogy. What kinds of teaching approaches are there? What makes for a tourism degree? Should it be 4 years because it is 4 years in other parts of the world? What is the situation for the Ghanaian context? And so if you enter one of the key areas that I'm looking at is tourism libraries. So if you enter a tourism library or the library of the Department of Hospitality and Tourism Management, which is in the University of Cape Coast, what kind of books do you see? If 70% of the books or 80% of the books or 100% of the books that are in the library are authored by scholars that are not Ghanaian, not African, then there are questions we need to answer, right? If you go into and to mind you, there are faculty members who are doing exceptional work in the University of Cape Coast who are resisting all forms of colonization or colonialism in many ways. But there's still a lot of work to be done. And so if I take, let's say, the course syllabus of courses that are offered in the department in Ghana, and majority of the items on the reading list are not items that are authored by local or African or scholars from various marginalized backgrounds, then we are still just perpetuating or reinforcing colonial relations. So I'm looking at things like that. And by power relations, supervisor-student relationships, we don't have non-Ghanaian or non-African faculty members. We have all Ghanaian. But I'm looking at Yeah, it's great, and I'm going beyond, just like I said, critical tourism studies looks beyond just what we
Beyond
see,
that,
right?
yeah,
So
absolutely.
beyond that, we're looking at what kinds of relationships exist
That's right.
between
Yeah.
this faculty. Of course,
Hmm.
there are cultural dimensions to how younger folks must relate with older folks. But then, to
Hmm.
what extent are these relationships similar to what colonization and
Yeah.
those relations? Yeah, so those are some of the specifics, and I'm looking also at the site, the site itself. How are structures built? What kind of settings do we have in the classroom?
Hmm.
The idea of having a professor stand in front and the rest
Yeah.
of the students sitting to watch also
Hmm.
just reinforces that kind of hierarchy or that kind of power
Yeah.
dynamics. Um,
Yeah.
can students interrupt a professor when they are presenting, or can they just speak, or they have to raise their hand to be called? And what do these things mean culturally, and what do they also mean as relationships
Hmm.
between colonialism and tourism? So these are just a few of the areas that I'm looking at specifically, and it's going good. Like I said, it's almost coming to an end, so we'll see how that comes along.
Congratulations. This is such an important topic and fascinating. Fascinating, absolutely.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so
thank
much.
you. Thank
Yeah, I love that you pointed out how important it is to see things beyond what we see, and
Yeah,
always try to dig deeper and analyze, whether there's power imbalances, and what causes them. Is it cultural? Is it colonial? Is it both? Right? And so I think that, yeah, that's super important. And you just pointed out something that's also extremely important for our listeners too. A lot of people would argue, why should we still talk about colonialism? What isn't it something in the past? But it's, yes, it may be a thing in the past, but it's still manifesting, in all sorts of ways, in like at all levels in society. The way, like, on which side we drive on the road, for example. But of course, like, a lot more issues that are still very complex, and are still, like, systems are still oppressive, you know
right.
um uh and so, yeah, I'm just curious about, because you talked about the books in your library and mostly written by Western scholars and so on. do does the higher education system now encourage more and more local authors to do research in the local context and actually write about them in the local languages, like, in Twi, the Gare, and so on? Or do scholars actually feel the pressure to also publish in English because you want the visibility and you want to be able to share your work with the rest of the world? Because English publication is the norm, unfortunately.
Yeah, I hope I answer this question satisfactorily to your listeners, and because it's an all-encompassing one, right? And I think that it's also a very sensitive area. You asked a
Mm-hmm.
question in the beginning of the rest of the questions. So yes, I think that educators and academic institutions in Ghana, and I believe in other parts of the world, are encouraging faculty members and
Mm-hmm.
students to do those things, to publish more and to look within and not necessarily outside. And a lot of scholars in Ghana, in Africa, and many other marginalized communities are doing amazing work. They are doing
Yeah.
writing amazing research outcomes and publish them. The challenge is that a lot of this amazing work ends up in Western journals,
Mm-hmm.
and that's just one part of the entire challenge, which is the fact.
Mm-hmm.
I speak with a lot of faculty members, and I know it's not only in the Ghanaian context, but one of the metrics for assessing the quality of work you're doing is to have your work published in high-ranking journals. And by high-ranking journals, we are looking at journals that are not in Ghana. We are looking at journals that are not. Doesn't mean that we do not have scholars doing amazing work in Ghana and other parts of Africa. Absolutely not. We have a lot of people doing amazing work, but the challenge, and that's something that we can talk about. Like we can look at that as another aspect of. Unfortunately, I'm not going deeper into that for my work, but that was one of the things that came up a lot about the want of faculty members and scholars to publish in journals that are foreign, not because they really want to, but because that's sort of like the only way to get recognized. That's the only way that Western scholars would be able to see their work, because truth is that a lot of Western scholars don't even pay attention to work that is done in other parts of the world if it's not in the journals that are traditional kinds of journals within this context. And so that's one of the challenges. That's one of the challenges. But I think that there is hope, because what you see now is that you see a lot of effort between lots of scholars within the African sub-region coming together. There are journals that are published within the African context. And so you see more and more scholars reaching out to these journals and trying to give a voice to themselves. The issue of language is a big one. It's a big one because it's a dilemma. It's a dilemma that all of us have to navigate, right? The question is, you spoke about publishing in English language, for instance, versus publishing in, let's say, Ewe. Ewe is my local dialect, or Twi, or Ga, or many other dialects we have in Ghana. The question is, a lot of scholars are also thinking about accessibility, right? Who gets to read this? Who are my audience? And so language can also be a challenge. There has been calls for not necessarily entirely publishing in languages that are only accessible to a small portion of global percentage, but maybe doing translations also. So, but then that also brings about other critical issues, such as then it means scholars in these areas have to do double work, because then when you finish publishing, you would have to do another work of doing translations. And so it's tricky. It's tricky.
It is very
in that
tricky.
regard.
Yeah, it is very tricky. It's almost like you want to publish in your own language, but then you are being punished because you either have to do extra work, or you don't get your work read by a larger audience that you're intending.
Exactly.
Yeah, and also the wanting to get the recognition through publishing in Western journals or like the top journals. Otherwise, you don't get the funding to actually do the work that you want to do and support the communities that you want to support locally. And so, I can totally see the dilemma. Thank you for
funding. And funding is a big one. Funding is a big one, because a lot of the funding opportunities, again, available in Ghana, and a lot of institutions in Africa have Western so they are from Western sources, and so all these funding agencies and organizations have their own expectations. And I get it, right? I get it. If you're funding a project, you would have your own list of expectations, which may or may not necessarily align with what the expectations of the researchers or the scholars are. So that's also a big point you raised there.
Thank you so much for explaining or unpacking all that. In a related note, I'm just wondering if you could share what decolonizing travel means to you with our listeners. Because we talk a lot, well, at RISE, we do a lot of work on talking about decolonizing travel and helping our travelers and tourism professionals who care about justice and tourism to unpack that. So I'm just wondering what that means to you.
Yeah, and I must commend you and the team at RISE Travel Institute, because I think that we've got to that point of travel or tourism where we need to start thinking more critically about some of the outcomes of travel, right? It's beyond just travel. I think that decolonizing travel means thinking or rethinking the way we travel, basically. Before I hop on a plane and book that resort, I need to, and that's not to say those things, we should not do those things, because like I said, travel has been part of human existence for millennia. So this thing will still continue. But my understanding of decolonizing travel means rethinking. So before I go on Expedia or Booking.com or whichever platform that you used to, book your packages, you want to be able to ask yourself a few questions. You want to be able to rethink the travel, the modes of transport, for instance. You want to be able to, while you are in the destination, engage with local communities. You don't want to just travel and stay in your bubble for the 1 week that you're there and have no contact at all with people who actually enable tourism. You want to be able to step outside of the hotel to maybe visit a local food joint, a local restaurant that is owned and managed, and it's only local dishes that are served. Or you want to be able to engage in, instead of maybe using hotels, you might want to, of course, there are also many issues such as security. We've heard a lot about security concerns with many kinds of platforms that provide accommodation and other services that are not necessarily the traditional hotels. But there are also really great options there that provide homestays, for instance. There are families and hosts that provide accommodation for people who travel. So you can look into some of these things. You can also read and do study about the culture and the people that live in the place that you want to visit. So travel within that broad area that dismantles and challenges legacies of colonialism, imperialism, exploitation, and within travel and tourism is what I would consider decolonizing travel. So ethics, equity, sustainability, issues of social justice, cultural respect, environmental stewardship. While we think about these, while we plan our trips, our travel plans, and I believe that doing that means we are decolonizing travel. That would be my interpretation of what decolonizing travel is.
Mawutor, I'm extending you an open invitation to work as to collaborate as a guest instructor for us.
Oh, wonderful! That's a privilege. I appreciate that, and I would love to. Thank you.
This is so amazing the way you explained this so succinctly and so beautifully. I think it's important for travelers to really think about or think beyond the way they do travel, the convention way of thinking about travel, right? Even before you go on the internet and book your, before you book a flight and the hotel, think about, well, there's even an extra step to decolonize. That is, why do we need to use these big online travel agencies? Are there other alternative ways to actually look for a homestay experience, for example, that you talked about? And so there are so many things to rethink and also to examine how our conventional way of travel, who actually benefit and who actually, got exploited in the process.
That's right.
Because of the choices that we make. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that definition.
Thank you.
So I do have, actually, the following question that I had prepared on some tips to help travelers be more mindful, ethical, and conscientious. You basically answered that, in your definition of decolonizing travel. So I'm going to just skip to the tourism sector, what do you think, in your view, what role does the tourism industry have to play in order to foster a more just and equitable world? Because the tourism industry doesn't talk a lot about decolonizing travel, unfortunately, because it seems too radical to them. And so what would you say, and how can you help them understand that it's an imperative?
Mm. This
Mm.
is also today. You asking me very very great and yeah, really really great questions that I think that we can talk about, and I think these are questions we should be asking, especially now. And so, thank you again, Vincie and
Thank
Rise Travel
you.
Institute. Uh, the tourism industry, basically, that's like the businesses that come together to facilitate tourism. I personally think that um, or the main reason why you don't hear a lot about decolonizing travel is because it's like it's a trade-off, right? You can't eat your cake and have it. That's like how it operates. Now,
Yeah.
what got me into this whole terrain of critical tourism studies was in 2018, I went for a conference in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And this was a conference that was organized by the National Tourism Authority. So it's the regulating body, National Tourism Authority, that for North America, so Canada and US. And so over here at this 5-day conference in Milwaukee, we had all these businesses. So we had like the top businesses in hospitality management, in hotel chains all over the world. They were there.
Yeah.
We had the tourism board or tourism ministry for all the states in the US. So you had them. We also had tourism institutions from like different parts of the provinces in Canada, all represented. And I was there as a student. Of course, I was there on a scholarship, so it was a funded trip. And I was there to only observe because the goal was for all those who were already in industry and playing huge roles and facilitating tourism all over the world, mentor students. So that was the part. I was then in my master's program. So I got there, and for the first 3 days of the conference, it was also not a traditional academic conference where you had people just presenting. It was sort of like a convention and a conference.
Yeah.
So you had all these ministries come to showcase. It's like an open kind of concept. It came to showcase whatever they had to do. But I did not hear anybody talk about impact of tourism. I didn't see any critical questions asked about how can we make travel more equitable. It was only about how can we make tourism more economically viable. It was just around the discussions of economics.
Right.
And so that's where I had a stamp. I started thinking more critically, and I'm like, no, we can't do tourism this way only. It's great. Sustainability obviously is not. It's a balance between the economics, the environmental, and then the social components of every society. So it's the 3 pillars of sustainability, right? But unfortunately, the tourism industry focuses more on the economic pillars. And so it's about how do we make our products more appealing? How do we increase potential customers? How do we satisfy customers and exceed their expectations so that they come back and spend more at the expense of how is the coming back of these travelers impacting the water bodies? How much volume of water, for instance, do hotels keep in their swimming pools, for instance, in destinations that have challenge with good drinking water, for instance,
Exactly.
right? Which businesses are promoting, for instance, tourism activities that like trophy hunting in some parts of the world. You if you had money, you could go pay and go shoot an elephant or to go kill an animal, and then when you do that, you get a trophy for So obviously there are travel or tourism businesses that promote those kinds of, because there's more money attached to those things. But when you say, oh, wait a minute, let's take a step back and start thinking about decolonizing, it means that, can we talk about slashing down the profits we make? Basically, that's what you're telling them. You're saying that, well, we need to cut down on our profit. We need to employ more locals. We need to give more money back to the communities. And so a lot of industry players are unfortunately unwilling to talk about this. Some are doing great in areas like that. And so I think that what I would say would be for us to be just in our operations as an industry. Tourism industry has to provide more economic opportunities for people overall. We talked about employment. A lot of locals, even though are employed in tourism businesses, you realize that the employment is not at top management. It's mostly those areas that they are exploited all the time, they overwork and they are not paid. And we see the balances, even when we go into the gender dynamics, you realize that it is very appalling. I think that the industry should also start thinking more about community development. So tourism industry businesses should start really doing things that support local communities. Local communities should be involved more in decision making. Businesses should actively promote cultural preservation. They should also invest in infrastructure and services, build a hospital or a clinic for the community that get some sources of good drinking water, and have event and programming such that if you're a hotel and you have travelers come, have community-based programs as part of the packages that you offer, so that when they come, there is also a component of community engagement, cultural exchange and understanding, environmental consciousness. And there should also be, I think there's a lot that the industry can do. Some businesses are doing great. Of course, Rise Travel Institute, you are a private not-for-profit, and you are doing a lot to educate and to bring to the tourism industry and engage with facilitators and promoters in the industry to be more responsible. And I think that that's the way we should go. Businesses should be more open to that. And there's so much more I can say, but I know that we won't finish today if I have to keep talking. So I think I'll end it here. If you have any other questions, I'll take that. But
the conversation definitely can last for days.
Right.
But yeah, you're so right that the conventional, like, mainstream tourism paradigm is still like putting profit and like putting profit in the center, and also trying to do everything to please visitors and to make sure that they would come back again. And so it's a lot about visitor satisfaction and less about what the local communities actually need and how tourism has been impacting them. So decolonizing the industry would mean putting local communities and the local natural systems back into the center of this paradigm. And I still remember this diagram that Professor Freya Higgins, the COS, she came up with, and I just really love, and that we've been really citing that in a lot of our courses and work. That is how it should be. Without the communities, without the ecosystems at the destination, there will be no tourism. Modern, this kind of commercial tourism as we see it now. So it's our responsibility to protect and make sure that we do travel and tourism in a way so that, like, the local communities thrive. And in order for that to happen, we need to let the locals, take up leadership position and let them determine how they want tourism to look like in that place. So
absolutely. People make the argument. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
people argue that putting local or indigenous members and people in communities in charge of high level sort of management. It's one that, because people argue that they are not equipped, they are not trained for positions like this. But the simple answer is train them.
Train them.
Businesses
Yeah.
are not willing to spend money to train and to
No.
get, because they also have bosses to report to. But the simple answer is train them. And you made a really good point. Tourism doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in place specifics. It exists within cultures, and the intricacies are very, very important for us to pay attention and not only. Otherwise, it's like a table that has 3 legs, but only one leg is standing, which is the economic leg. At the end of the day, the table cannot stand, right? So, very important.
Topple. Very important. And you also made an important point that yes, like this myth about how tourism helps local economy, as you said, like or like help create jobs for the locals, but oftentimes we're talking about entry-level jobs rather than like having the local people get their fair share of what tourism really brings to the kind of that tourism brings. And it's essential and imperative to have local experts and train like locals to get to leadership position and let them determine, have a say at the table, and let them determine how they want tourism to look like in their homes. All right, cool. So thank you. I think we're approaching the end of the interview. We can talk for days, but
I know.
we can continue like after this podcast interview.
That's right.
A final question for you. What career path are you looking to pursue, and what legacy do you want to leave behind?
Great question. I remember I taught a class this term, and the first lecture I went for, we did an icebreaker, and then one of the questions was, what career path are you hoping to pursue after your degree? And then I added a caveat that if you don't know yet, that's okay, because sometimes I'm still trying to figure that out myself at this point. So, but I would like to say that I would
I'll check back in. I'll check back in 6 months.
I definitely I definitely want to stay in research. Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry to talk over you, but I was saying that you're absolutely right. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I graduated, when I, got my bachelor's, and I did not know what I wanted to do when I got my PhD. And so even, like I only started RISE in 2020. And before then I was like, okay, what should I do? What should I do? It's like, but it would never be too late if you, one day it'll happen that you just, I now have an idea. I know what.
I agree. Yeah, but definitely I would want to, I want to be a professor. I love teaching. I would want to pursue the career of a professor and do research in general, focusing on tourism that is decolonial. So whatever that I mean, we've had a very extensive conversation on various notions. Of course, just to put this out there also, there are many decolonial scholars who may not necessarily agree with the approach that other decolonial scholars might use, because decolonization means different things to different people. There are very radical decolonial scholars who think that decolonization is an actual dismantling of everything Eurocentric, everything Western. There are also people who are, it's like I see it as a spectrum, and there are people, decolonial scholars, on different sides of the continuum or the spectrum. So the approach that I take to decolonization is not what scholars like Fanon will take, right? But I'm looking at approaches that that think that all knowledges are important, all understandings of tourism are really important. It is just prioritizing or making certain knowledges superior to others. That's the problem. And so my approach is that there has to be a table provided for all knowledges to be respected and given the same level of authority. That's the approach I take. So
Love that.
That's what my career path is looking like, and the impact that I would like to make, or the legacy, is to affect especially students, right? I want to be able to inspire students, both in academia and even those that are not, beyond, to critically examine their own roles and responsibilities within the tourism industry. So if you are working in a hotel or a tour operation or in a school or in a travel institute, you want to start thinking about how each day of my life at work or in school can contribute to just and equitable and sustainable futures for all stakeholders. So not just today, but also tomorrow. I also want to be able to leave a legacy of advocacy. I'm doing a lot of advocacy work now. It's like I'm going back to my university and saying, hey, we need to rethink how we do education here. You know, I know there are some people there who will not be very excited about what I'm doing, but I know we'll get there. We'll get there.
That's awesome.
Community engagement also have impact on the educational landscape. And obviously, as a professor, you want to also make intellectual contributions. I want to be able to write and inspire people through my writing, right? And be influential in how I speak about tourism education, tourism, and decolonization in Ghana. So that's it.
I would definitely follow all your future publications. And I just wanted to say your future students would be so lucky to have you as a professor.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mawutor, for joining us on this podcast. We're so lucky to have you. So this brings us to the end of our journey today. If you liked what you heard and would like to hear more, please subscribe and comment. You can follow us at Rise Travel Institute on Facebook and Instagram and on LinkedIn. Here at Rise Travel Institute, we believe conscious travel can help us create a more just and equitable world. If you're a college student planning a study abroad trip, a tourism professional who wants to create a more equitable and inclusive industry, or just anyone who is currently traveling the world and wants to understand how to travel in a more just and sustainable way, we do encourage you to head to risetravelinstitute.org for more information on our educational programs and resources. We'll be back soon with another episode. Until then, keep roaming, keep learning, and continue to be a Rise traveler. Bye.
That brings us to the end of our journey today. If you liked what you heard and would like to hear more, please subscribe, like, and comment. You can follow us at Rise Travel Institute on Facebook and Instagram. Here at Rise Travel Institute, we believe conscious travel can help us create a more just and equitable world. If you are a college student planning a study abroad trip, a tourism professional who wants to create a more equitable and inclusive industry, or anyone who is currently traveling the world and wants to understand how to travel in a just and sustainable way, we do encourage you to head to risetravelinstitute.org for more information on our educational programs. We will be back soon with another episode, and until then, keep roaming, keep learning, and continue to be a Rise traveler.